So, ladies and gents, Bill O'Reilly has provided us with the latest example of a conservative chowing down on his own foot on the subject of race, something that he himself has already done before and probably will do again in the future. Just give it time. This time, Bill purported to be fact-checking Michelle Obama's reference to the accurate historical fact, as Bill himself conceded, that slaves helped build the White House. For some reason, one little tidbit that he felt the need to sneak in or tag into his statement was the claim that slaves who helped build the White House were well fed and had decent lodgings. I'm not sure why Bill O'Reilly thought that little tidbit would somehow add to his viewers' understanding of the history behind this whole statement that Michelle Obama made. Was he necessarily trying to suggest that the slaves who built the White House, or American slaves in general, somehow had it good? I don't know, but I'm not sure it matters. In fact, I'm pretty sure it doesn't matter. I do know that his addition to that little factoid did not add to a more complete understanding of the issue on the part of his viewers. There's no reason to think that it would have. I do know also that there is a disturbing trend out there of people downplaying slavery and making it out to be something less atrocious than it actually was. I remember reading an article at Vox.com, I think sometime last year, in which an African American who had actually worked as a tour guide at a Southern former plantation talked all about his experiences doing that job and having to answer questions about the history of slavery coming from people who seemed almost to sympathize with the South's peculiar institution, as it was often called. They would ask questions like, the slave owners gave the slaves a place to live, so were the slaves ever grateful? That's an actual question that this tour guide at a former Southern plantation actually got from some of the guests whom he was guiding through the place. They actually asked him if any of the slaves were grateful to the people who enslaved them. Now, the reason I bring this up is that, quite simply, this is grotesque hypocrisy coming from people of a certain ideological background. All too often, I've seen people on the political right try to poo-poo the whole historical phenomenon of slavery as if it was no big deal, or as if African Americans should just get over it. There's really no conceivable excuse for that attitude, especially coming from people of that ideological background. These are folks who claim to believe in liberty, who claim to believe in freedom. These are the same people who raise a huge hue and cry anytime the government threatens to raise taxes on them higher than they'd like, or threatens to regulate their business activities or other activities more stringently than they would like. These are the same people who make a huge stink anytime anyone proposes to regulate their ownership or possession of guns a little bit more strictly. Anytime you threaten to regulate any number of activities in which they engage on a regular basis, they're up in arms about it. Yet whenever the example of complete loss of liberty, the total and utter infringement of a human being's God-given right to be free is brought up, all of a sudden it's as if they just can't be bothered to address the issue at all. It's as if they are only reluctantly willing, at best, even to recognize just how foul an institution this truly was and how shameful and disgraceful it is that it played such a pivotal role in the development of the United States economy. Not to mention the economies of all the Western, that is to say European, imperial and colonial powers in the era after Christopher Columbus's explorations. I have a message for folks who perpetrate that particular attitude. Wake up. Start applying your own stated professed belief in liberty just a little bit more. And get outside of your political and cultural comfort zone and acknowledge what slavery was really all about. Don't get hung up on irrelevant, meaningless factoids and nonsense like this idea that some slaves were well-fed and well-housed. However well-fed and housed they were still slaves. They ultimately didn't have control over their own lives. Imagine what it must be like to be treated for your entire life, cradle to grave, birth to death, womb to tomb, as someone else's property. Imagine spending your entire life in captivity, being born a slave, growing up a slave, living your whole adult life as a slave, growing old as a slave, and dying as a slave, and doing so in the knowledge that your children and your children's children and your children's children's children, and in all likelihood, as far as you know, all future generations of your family in perpetuity, all of your descendants, will be slaves after you. Imagine not having your own last name, knowing that your closest family members can be sold away from you or you can be sold away from them at the drop of a hat, at your owner's whim. Imagine spending your entire life not being able to get an education, never getting to learn to read or write or do arithmetic, never getting to determine your own destiny, not to mention doing back-breaking manual labor, usually for no compensation whatsoever, for your entire life. Ladies and gentlemen, this was one of the greatest crimes against humanity in all of human history. If you're someone who purports to believe in liberty, according to any definition of that word one can name, please wake up to the reality of slavery as the utter infringement of liberty. And please tailor your commentary on the subject accordingly. Thanks. It's really not that much to ask.